Philosophers talk to our times, echoes of Rome. So why does one consider Tacitus in a series about philosophers of Rome? Because Tacitus, in many ways, defines, because he is drawn upon by Hobbes, by Spinoza, by so many, he defines what power looks like, and the difficulties of power, its complexities. First, and probably most important for me, reading the histories, Tacitus gives you the problem of revolution, understood clearly. Revolutions, he says, are easy to start, and yet he clearly shows they're so difficult to stop. Rome, then, was glad to have got rid of the dreadful Nero, a debauched lecher who had inherited the throne because his mother had poisoned her husband, his uncle. Her uncle, his great-uncle, who had no real claim to power or might, a narcissist of the Trumpian type, who was forever declaring peace when there was war, and aspiring to trophies that he had no right to claim. He was better off dead, Tacitus thought. And yet, and it is always the end yet with Tacitus, there is that deep problem of revolutions. Oh, it is so easy to start a revolution. Once you've got your critical mass, once you don't leave the streets. If you're on the streets and hold them, here's a word of advice from an old activist. Don't ever leave them. Revolutions, then, are easy to start once they are begun. But once you have smashed the state, what then? What is it there to stop you smashing what comes? And what comes after that? And what comes after that? Starting them is the easy part. Fighting a corrupt system. Straightforward. The problem is, what happens next? In Rome's history, Tacitus clearly shows what happens next is violent civil war. The powers that had created Nero, the corruptions, they were still there. And the powers that had overthrown him, military power, that was still present. And so he is replaced first by Galba, who was the Joe Biden of his day, a man long in his history, who appeared such a great potential ruler, as long as Tacitus says, he was not given power. And he is overthrown then, for reasons of his age and his vicissitudes, his approaching seniority, by Nero Mark II. Otho. Another vain narcissist who's replaced by yet another narcissist as the murderous cycle continues. Otho then had Rome for a while, but his successor, Vitellian, was by reason, in fact, of his own corruption and his capacity to eat, appointed governor of Lower Germany, I think, the Rhinish legions anyway. And he had such a name, his father had been a friend of Claudius, that name persuaded his legions to rebel. And the fact that he was a known bon vivant with no authority made the choice even easier. He then sweeps down, or he doesn't. He comes down slowly, eating all the way. But the Rhinish legions then destroy Otho's power base. And yet that was only the beginning of it. For Vitellius, another bon vivant, devours Rome in a sequence of huge gluttonous feasts and is replaced before year's end by the Balkan legions who had rallied behind Vespasian. In all this endless cycle of chaos, it is increasingly difficult to see where legitimacy ends. In the end, Vespasian wins because he has the best and most soldiers and is the last man standing. Revolutions start easily and in hope. The problem, Tacitus will remind you again and again and again, is where do you stop them? How do you stop them? This comes to the second point. Tacitus is very clear about power. Oh, power doesn't corrupt, and absolute power certainly doesn't corrupt absolutely. It is rather the test of the mettle of the ruler. To be in power is to have your personality shifted, warped, changed slightly. And you will be judged by how it changes, how you react to that change. And the point being, it is very difficult to predict those changes. On paper, Galba was a great emperor. He had been a fine leader. And yet in practice, he was a senile old fool. While on paper, Vespasian, the eventual saviour of Rome, founder of a dynasty of almost Victorian respectability, was on the face of it an unlikely general. He wasn't a great leader. He was not openly liked by his army. And yet, once he becomes an emperor, somehow he finds a dignity and a quiet calmness amongst the storm that actually wins over. Power, then, is its own test. It genuinely challenges who and what you are and who and what you can become. And you never know what you'll be until you hold it. And you'll never know how somebody will be until they have it. If revolutions are hard, it is made all the harder by the fact you never really know who you have elected and what will follow from that election. Thirdly, there comes a point in every state, a point of utter corruption. In a book written later but set earlier called the Annals, Tacitus, in another history of Rome, talks about Tiberius. And Tiberius is a character who he is intrigued by, I think it's fair to say. Tiberius, who is the ultimate pervert, who later in life was little more than a tyrant, but also kept the peace in Rome, kept the order against all the encroaching chaos, and managed the job in spite of not really wanting to do it, with surprising aplomb. That Tiberius, then, for Tacitus, who is held in power by the very supine nature of the senates. When Tiberius then gets increasingly erratic, it should have been the job of the Senate to speak against them. And yet there comes a point, Tacitus says, a point in the fall of any state, where it isn't in the interest of those who have power and freedom of speech to exercise that power, to exercise that freedom, to actually fight. They gain far more personally by becoming toadies. And this is clearly the point that America has reached. None, but not just America, it is clearly the point that Trump challenges the world with, as endless toadies suck up to him for no readily explained reason. They won't get anything from him any more than anybody got out of Tiberius. It's all for the show, for the immediate payoff. But what do you create? Well, Tacitus shows. You create an audience of toadies and yet a nest of vipers, because it is full of people who hate the people that hate viscerally those they are praising. And that such a system is incandescent. It cannot be stable. It will always end in murder, difficulty and death. The fourth lesson I think I learned from Tacitus is that you must not judge a person by their capacity to create pity in your soul. One of the things that Tacitus does in histories is always have a fine death scene. He likes his death scenes. So Galba is hacked to pieces and you're not invited to be sympathetic. But the two really debauched and evil emperors, Otho and Vitellius, have noble ends. You're invited to be sympathetic, and yet you're also told not to forget who or what they were. Just because a leader's feelings are hurt then, that's no reason not to carry on despising. Finally, I think I learned from Tacitus the sheer difficulty, going back almost to the first point, of change. This is the impasse in France. The clear republic, the Fifth Republic, has clearly run its course, and Macron an idiot. And yet the problem is, what do you replace it with? And how? And will what you replace it with be any better? or will the same evil councils still govern it? It's a genuine problem. A genuine problem we still face, as are all the problems. It is the impasse of power. Power that doesn't corrupt, but that changes and warps who and what we are. And any attempt to change the world for the better must always read its histories first and know it well.